Jefferson's vision also required a program for education, for educating what he called the common people, in order to secure and preserve for them a due degree of liberty. Jefferson, of course, promoted colleges for, quote, teaching the languages, geography, surveying, and other useful things, as well as universities for the sciences. And of course, as we all know, he retired to found and be the first president of the University of Virginia. On the other hand, Jefferson wanted to constrain Americans in certain ways. He had an ideal in mind, an ideal that he believed would preserve the virtues of the people and lead to the nation's greatest possible happiness. Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people, wrote Jefferson in his notes of on the state of Virginia. In their breasts, quote, he has made his peculiar deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. It is the focus in which he keeps alive that sacred fire which otherwise might escape from the face of the earth. Corruption of morals in the mass of cultivators, said Jefferson, is a phenomenon of which no age nor nation has furnished an example. While there is land to labor, wrote Jefferson, let us never wish to see our citizens occupied at a workbench or twirling a distaff. Carpenters, masons, smiths are wanting in husbandry, but for the general operation of manufacture, let our workshops remain in Europe. The loss by transportation of commodities across the Atlantic, the loss of exports in other words, will be made up in happiness and permanence of government. Jefferson disdained banks, which banished precious metals and substituted a more fluctuating and unsafe medium, in his words. According to Jefferson, banking institutions had, quote, withdrawn capital from useful improvements and employments to nourish idleness. He disdained commerce and manufacturing, writing that for the emolument of a small proportion of our society who prefer these demoralizing pursuits to labors useful to the whole, the peace of the whole is endangered, and all our present difficulties produced. Jefferson's America, then, was a nation of independent citizens, spread widely on abundant lands, engaged in useful, primarily agricultural works, and free of the demoralizing pursuits of banking, manufacturing, and commerce. This vision was anathema to Hamilton, who, unlike Jefferson, was born without the benefits of land and wealth. Hamilton, poor and orphaned, first demonstrated his boyhood talents as a clerk for an import-export firm in the British West Indies. His worldview, in other words, developed in the midst of a thriving commercial and trade center. If Jefferson was conservative in his economics, rejecting the rising industrial and financial world in favor of a more traditional agricultural economy, then Hamilton was undoubtedly the leading economic progressive of the founding generation. In the words of biographer Ron Chernow, Hamilton was the clear-eyed apostle of America's economic future, setting forth a vision that many found enthralling, others unsettling, but that would ultimately prevail. Hamilton looked to the urban elite, the merchants, bankers, the business leaders, not the yeoman farmers, to lead the new nation's economy. He supported government activism in economic affairs, and as Treasury Secretary, he set about creating the conditions for a flourishing market economy, with banks, credit, uniform currency, liquid capital, enforceable contracts, respect for private property, patents, import duties, all these sorts of things. Hamilton also supported a system of internal improvements. In his famous 1791 report on manufactures, Hamilton credited the improvement of the roads and the opening of canals for success of British manufacturers. Uncharacteristically, even Jefferson, perhaps swayed by his Secretary of the Treasury, Albert Gallatin, proposed in his 1806 message to Congress to use federal surpluses to fund, quote, public education, roads, rivers, canals, and such other objects of public improvement as it may be thought proper to add to the constitutional enumeration of federal powers. By these operations, wrote Jefferson, new channels of communications will be opened between the states, the lines of separation will disappear, their interests will be identified, and their union cemented by new and indissoluble ties. Doesn't sound like the Jefferson I know, but stated words. The difference, of course, is Hamilton's focus on the economic benefits of internal improvements for manufacturing, and Jefferson's focus on the social benefits for the people. Hamilton's America was a vibrant, forward-looking nation with bustling urban centers engaged in global trade and featuring the demoralizing pursuits of banking, manufacturing, and commerce. 200 years ago this week, Abraham Lincoln was born into Jefferson's America. His father was an independent farmer who moved his family from Kentucky to Indiana to Illinois in pursuit of more fruitful lands. In fact, one can literally say Lincoln lived in Jefferson's America when his father moved the family into the Old Northwest Territory to benefit from the township system, standardized surveying processes, and saleable lots, all designed by Jefferson in the 1780s. Even a Lincoln's eventual home state, Illinois, approximates the name Jefferson initially suggested for it, Illinois. Illinois got lucky. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one of these maps with all the names that Jefferson proposed for the Old Northwest Territory. They sound like Mesopotamia. Gleaves might know a few of them. They're terrible. I think we got lucky too. We didn't end up with Jefferson's name. However, Lincoln found his father's way of life distasteful. He disliked farm work and much of the physical labor the frontier had to offer. When he was president, Lincoln recalled a turning point in his adolescence. He was hired by two men on the Ohio River to take them out on his small boat to a larger boat, and he expected just a few bits payment in return. But when they arrived at the destination, the men turned around to him and tossed him 2 silver half-dollars. "I could scarcely believe my eyes," Lincoln later told friends. "Gentlemen, you may think it was a very little thing, but it was a most important incident in my life. I could scarcely credit that I, a poor boy, had earned $1 in less than a day. The world seemed wider and fairer before me." At the age of 17, Lincoln had gotten his first glimpses of Hamilton's America when he began selling firewood to steamers on the Ohio River, working as a riverboat man, and even driving flatboats to New Orleans for a local store owner, stocked with meat, corn, and flour for sale. After he left his father's home, Lincoln became a store clerk and then a store owner for a short while in New Salem, Illinois. Ultimately, Lincoln did not make a career in commerce, but these early experiences shaped his thinking about the economy. "I am not ashamed to confess," Lincoln said in a speech in March 1860, "that 20 years ago I was a hired laborer, mauling rails at work on a flatboat, just what might happen to any poor man's son," said Lincoln. "I want every man to have a chance in which he can better his condition, when he may look forward and hope to be a hired laborer this year and next, work for himself afterward, and finally to hire men that work for him. That," said Lincoln, "is a true system." Lincoln wanted to free Americans to exercise their right to rise through a medium of a vibrant and growing economy. That, of course, was Hamilton's America. On the side of the Union, Lincoln said in the depths of the Civil War, is a struggle for maintaining in the world that form and substance of government whose leading object is to elevate the conditions of men, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear paths to laudable pursuits for all, to afford all an unfettered start, a fair chance in the race of life. Lincoln, like Hamilton, envisioned an activist government in economic affairs, focused on creating the conditions in which Americans could advance themselves and prosper. He wanted citizens to be able to choose, as he had, their own path in the pursuit of happiness, rather than being locked by a stagnant economy into the paths of their fathers and grandfathers. Born into Jefferson's America and shaped by Hamilton's, Lincoln's prescription for public happiness included elements of both. On Hamilton's side of the ledger, Lincoln supported internal improvements to promote economic development, banks, including a national bank with government deposits, and tariff protection for manufacturing firms, among other economic measures.